Who would have thought that 1984 and Brave New World would be operating manuals for the people in charge? And they seem to have embraced fully how to destroy people's spirits.
Hey friends, thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Hey, I have on the line a new friend. Her name is Lonnie Clark. She's got a show on UCY.TV radio. So just go to UCY.TV radio to hear it. You can also hear it in the archives. The name of the show is The Age of Fission. It's on from 8 to 9 Pacific, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And today we're going to talk about an event that changed the lives of all of us on planet Earth. It happened on March 11th, 2011, and that's the Fukushima event and devastating earthquake that hit Japan. Lonnie, are you there?
I am here. Thank you.
Hey, it's a pleasure to speak with you. You know, you and I talked just the other day to get to know each other, and I'd like to think we became fast friends. We're kindred spirits.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like we have a lot of the same goals and values, really, about helping to save our planet, because we're really at a critical time.
We are at a critical time. I mean, and I don't think most of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues realize it. I think most of the people on planet Earth are completely unaware of Fukushima and what happened on March 11th, 2011, and how absolutely devastating it is for the biosphere and how absolutely devastating it will be for humanity and is already starting to be for the Pacific Ocean specifically. Have you found that to be true? Are there many people that you know that can even tell you what Fukushima is?
Yeah, most people, I would say about half of the people I know kind of know something about it. They were like where I was a few years ago. They knew it was something that wasn't right, but they figured the government's taking care of it. And then a lot of the people just have no idea at all what that Fukushima presents a danger to our planet. So, and then when you speak to them, because it's so catastrophic, it kind of clicks in their head. They really shut down in fear. So this is the focus of my radio show, is actually to help people live in the age of, because we are now in an age of fission. Fukushima has 3 nuclear power plants, at least that we know of, that are in full China syndrome, meaning that the nuclides are building on themselves and the energy is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's worse now than it was when it started on 3/11/11. Now TEPCO admits there are trillions of becquerels of highly radioactive contamination going into the Pacific Ocean. Trillions. And they use that very casually, so that will tell you how catastrophic it is.
Well, they use it very casually and they rarely mention it, meaning you never
Right.
hear about it in the Mockingbird mainstream media. You won't hear about it from the nightly news folks at ABC, CBS, or NBC, nor will you hear about it on CNN. They're just completely ignoring it. There's a blackout, a media blackout in this country. And you and I talked about this the other day briefly when we were getting to know each other. As I've said before, I'm quite sure that Obama gets a national security briefing every single morning on his desk, and you can bet your bottom dollar that Fukushima and a Fukushima update is on that list. But they never mention it to the American people, and I think it's because they can't fix it to
You know,
stem the tide.
this is where I really disagree with the nuclear cartel. I think that they are intentionally, they use us like lab rats. There was a scientist in Japan who basically said they're kind of excited about Fukushima because now they really have a large enough population to really study how radiation affects the human body. It's incomprehensible. You know, I on my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art, I recently read an article by Dr. Weinberg. He was one of the Manhattan Project scientists who was a proponent of nuclear energy. In the article, it was the first time he talked about the nuclear energy industry the world has created a Faustian bargain with the nuclear industry, and now we have essentially created a nuclear priesthood. And that those terms, and this is exactly how they speak. If you like, there was a story out this morning about the lady who's running the uranium mines in Australia. And she said, well, the one thing, yes, it's very catastrophic, but we're very smart. We know how to handle it. When in fact, they don't really spend any money finding out how to mitigate the harm of radiation. They basically every single nuclear reactor is a brand new design. So the one doesn't work, they scrap it and they make it a little bit different. So the collusion, and part of this collusion is that General Electric owns the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry is really run by most of the media that runs the United States and a large portion of the European. So we are on a need to know basis, and they are not going to tell us.
Now, you said something really important. You mentioned that they've started a nuclear priesthood, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it's part and parcel to the overall worldview of these New World Order
Yes.
monsters, really. And I choose that word very specifically because they really are monsters. And even the scientists that are playing along and part of some of this stuff may not know any better, but they're playing ball with monsters. And it reminds me of what's going on in CERN. You know, there's this ultimate hubris that's been reached by the scientific elite, and they think they can control all of this stuff, and they can't. These reactions cannot be stopped. And that comes from experts out there. I interviewed Helen Caldicott on February 9th, 2014. The name of that interview is The Horrible Truth About Fukushima, and Helen says, at this point, there is no best case scenario for Fukushima. Just worsening degrees of horror because it's scientifically impossible to clean up what has already occurred. And we know that's true because TEPCO has said it. They've said, Lonnie, the technology to clean this up does not exist.
Yeah, they're saying 40 years from now. Well, when they said that, this is something to consider. Dr. John Goffman, who was a Manhattan Project scientist who was basically drummed out of the nuclear industry, he was hired by the Livermore Labs in the late 60s to come up with a solution about, because they did not tell us about radioactive waste for 20 years, and the miners were getting sick, the uranium miners. So the government wanted to find a way to make radiation not so bad. His job was to find a way to say that hormesis, which means that a little bit of radiation is good for you, or that at the very least it didn't harm you. And the worst case scenario was that it was very dangerous. Well, every study that he and Dr. Arthur Tamplin did showed repeatedly, especially for women and children in utero, even there is no safe dose, none whatsoever, right? So he actually studied the Japanese people after World War II when the government basically went in, tested everybody, destroyed their documents when they realized how catastrophic it was. So he decided to study them on his own. And in the 60s, he came out with a paper that basically said the military and the nuclear industry underreport the negative effects of radiation by 90% and deny that radiation causes any harm. And that is still, I call that the 90% rule. That is still what goes on right now to this day. And in fact, most of the energy companies have copied that meme. And we saw this in Colorado when they dumped all that stuff in the river. They're now telling us, don't worry, it's going to be fine in 10 years. Anybody with a brain knows it's not going to be fine.
And anybody with a brain also knows that the EPA, which is tasked with preventing such disasters as that spill in the river in Colorado, they did it. They're responsible for it, and it really is starting to look like they did it on purpose to get Superfund cleanup money. And it really speaks again to the hubris and the danger of bureaucracy, the danger of big government, the danger of this New World Order government, which does not care about people.
Well, I would say the caveat on that is I really think what we need to do is rein in corporate control. Like, I believe that the subcontracting of our government services has been the demise of the establishment of what, after World War II, when we had the New Deal, we entered into a time of economic growth that we had not seen, but that was because we relied on private businesses. There were no subcontractors. In the Vietnam War era, that's when the subcontracting, Dick Cheney was actually the first person to talk the government into doing subcontractors in the Vietnam War, and they have been after it for a long time.
Yeah.
And really, in my view anyways, I think that is essentially government services need to be run at a higher standard, and there needs, we need to just get the big corporate money out of government.
Yeah, I want to say one thing there. You mentioned Dick Cheney, one of the demons on planet Earth. Dick Cheney and his buddy Donald Rumsfeld, they go back to being in government in the Reagan era, when I think they both together came up with a continuity of government plan under Ronald Reagan, which remained secret and was rolled out on 9/11. When Cheney was, of course, in the PIOC, the bunker below the White House, in control on 9/11, and Rummy was over there at the Pentagon. These are really bad people. Rumsfeld, as you I'm sure well know, is the man responsible when he was at Searle for finally getting aspartame approved after years and years and years of it not being approved by the FDA because it appears to cause cancer in rats, but somehow Rummy got it pushed through. These people are truly demons, and it speaks to the fact that Well, you mentioned the subcontracting. Then they take us to war in Iraq, an unconstitutional war based on lies. And who gets all the no bid contracts? Cheney's former company, Halliburton. It just it's. I know everybody knows this. It's just it needs to be said for anybody that doesn't understand. I mean, does it surprise you, Lonnie, that there are still people that think our government is benevolent and that this nation still stands for the principles of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and is the most benevolent, wonderful nation on planet Earth, despite the Pentagon and despite what the Pentagon's been up to? I
You
mean,
know, I have a very good friend of mine that I made friends with last year, and she goes to the standard doctor. She takes medication every day.
flu
She has
shot.
to get along on a really deep level. And she said, "You know, Lonnie, I get it that what you're saying about Fukushima is horrible. That the government is really just not what they appear to be." She said, "But I'll tell you the truth. If I really decided to believe that, I'd have a nervous breakdown. So I'm just choosing."
Hmm.
To just believe that it's all going to be okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Seriously. And I think there are millions, many, many, many Americans share that thought because that's their actions.
Yeah.
They are one of my big frustrations is there is just no activity. You know, we've done protests and we've advertised, we've had people, we've tried to get people to come out into the street to fill the streets or like I'm about to go walk the streets of Eugene and get signatures for people to stop the idea of hormesis. The NRC doesn't even want to test for radiation anymore. They want to adopt the hormesis. They want to throw out the linear no threshold, which means all radiation is bad for you. And they want to change their standards to saying, let's study hormesis. Let's say that radiation is, let's make an assumption that radiation is pretty good for you. And most people do not understand what that means. We're talking childhood diseases in 10 years that nobody has ever seen. We're not talking about simple things. We're talking about what happens with children is extremely catastrophic. It makes them sterile. It gives them heart attacks. It gives them cancer. It gives them diabetes. Children are extremely affected by radiation. And it is, in my view, unconscionable that we are neglecting the future of humanity through allowing the nuclear cartel just to continue to lie to us. The 90% rule is like, well, it can't be that bad. Yes, it's actually really bad. And, you know, this is what I told a friend of mine. In Germany, people actually, that's where they were for many years while millions of their neighbors were being thrown in death camps. And I believe firmly that the number one reason why Germany shut down all its nuclear power plants right after Fukushima is they do not want to be in a position ever again of saying, we did not know.
Hmm.
Because they know, they do know. Angela Merkel is a scientist. She understands very clearly what's happened. And you're right, they do know exactly what's happening. And in fact, let me share an antidote with you. Do you mind?
No, please.
You know, I have my own business, and this lady called me up to talk about her situation. And she's from Washington. She just moved here, and she used to work for the wildlife department near Hanford, which uh, I could talk to you about that. That is Hanford is an extremely dangerous situation right now, and the Columbia Generating Station.
Is that the same type of reactor that we saw, the GE reactor that we saw in Fukushima?
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and
And
I just want people to understand, you guys, that they store the spent fuel rods on top of the reactor. So when we saw Fukushima 3 and 4 blow up, those
on top
fuel
of
rods.
an active earthquake fault,
Yeah,
which
no,
is
it's
there.
it's absolutely criminal, and you and I discussed in our get to know each other call that this is all demonic by design. It's so brilliant
Yes.
in its demonic nature because it's so obviously fraudulent and it's so obviously criminal and
This
it's
is
so
how deep
obviously
vision is, Sean.
evil, right? Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had to say that. So,
I know, and it is evil, and it is super frustrating. Well, she told me, and I said, well, what do you think about Fukushima? She's like, her voice stopped. She's like, they know. I said, what do you mean? She goes, let me share a story with you. She goes, my coworker, she goes, we have seen in Washington, near the Columbia Generating Station, near Hanford, we have seen two-headed deers. We have seen two-headed snakes. We have seen two-headed fish. We know what it causes. She said, a friend of mine, my colleague who worked for the service for 12 years, went up when this thing about the earthquake fault 2 years ago. The Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility did a new earthquake study because the government refused to do it. And they discovered that it is a catastrophic event. He went into his supervisor and said, don't you think we should at least warn the people around here that maybe something might happen? She said he was fired the next day. The next day. He had worked for the service for 12 years. Now, and he can't get a job working for the government. He can only be private industry. So here's a man who worked for them for 12 years and dared to pipe up and was gone immediately with no fanfare, just disappeared. And she said that sent a chilling effect to everybody in their unit. Everybody realized we need to keep our trap shut.
Yeah. Well, I think the same thing is probably going on with geoengineering. Everybody's kept on this compartmentalized need-to-know basis, and anybody with critical thinking that actually cares about others and kind of breaks their conditioning for a moment in this corporate environment, in this government environment, in this bureaucracy, anybody that sticks their head up a little too high just gets it chopped off because the beast keeps moving, and the beast doesn't want anybody questioning what the beast is doing. I know that's a vast generalization, but I think it's pretty much spot on as it relates to what is going on behind the scenes as this. Again, we refer to it as this New World Order, initiative, this New World Order government.
It is actually the Old World Order. It's
you're right.
People doing exactly what they do with new technology. And you know what I say to that? I think that the way to heal from that is for people to love themselves, to step out and realize that the universe will provide for them. They don't need the $200,000 job that protects the liars and criminals. They can live a decent life. What we need is a mass exodus, and we need some level of integrity, because in our country, at least, I find that's one of the most offensive things is we complain about the youth, but the adults in our country lack integrity at every level. They find it no problem to tell little lies, to ignore little truths. They go to work for people that are harming the world. And honestly, we need to be of service to each other and on an honest level. And, I'm not a so-called religious person, but I'm deeply spiritual, and I really believe that in the universe, love is the greatest power there is. And if we love ourselves and love our children, it's like Helen Caldicott had that show, If You Love Our Planet. If you love our planet, you will not even consider colluding with these people.
That's right.
And you're willing to walk the walk and do what it has. And frankly, our youth needs to see that. This is why I'm willing to do the radio show. I work in a pretty conservative industry. I help people with tax problems, and I view it as a service to my fellow Americans so the government doesn't just rape them all the time. I help people save their lives and help them figure out how to navigate in this system that really is intended to harm people, not only financially, but it's like we're living with batterers. I often say this on my radio show. There is no battered culture center. We are in a culture where we are just being pummeled every single day at every turn. And the only way you're going to get out of that is to confront the batterer and refuse to participate.
All right, now you got me on something. Do you remember the BTK killer? I believe his name was Dennis Rader. The BTK killer, you guys can look that up. It's a very despicable, horrible, satanic bad guy, killed some people, went underground. Nobody had heard from the BTK killer. Nobody knew who it was. For years, I think nearly 2 decades, he resurfaces, makes some mistakes. The FBI catch this guy. And it turns out he had a family, had a couple of kids, a wife for all of those years, and was doing these terrible things behind the scenes. The point is this. As soon as the family found out about the horrors that their father and the husband had been perpetrating on people, they disowned him and refused to have any more contact with him. And yet the American people still love their government despite the endless litany of crimes. And I wanted to share that forever because I just think that people cling bitterly to their normalcy bias. And I have just often said, if you can at this point shake off the false right-left paradigm and understand that both the right and the left are aligned against the people. If you can't get it by now, I'm not sure how you're going to wake up, Lonnie. I'm not sure how to wake people up like your friend who says she chooses not to wake up because she doesn't want to face the horrible truth.
Well, I think this is the thing. This is my point. People are awake. We don't need to wake them up. What we need to do is give them the courage to live with integrity. And we are facing some pretty catastrophic things. And we are facing some pretty, Ron Wyden's office, my own senator, blocks my phone calls. Mm-hmm. I have to I have to block my number before I can get through to his office because they don't want to hear from me. And, what does that tell me? That I've really hit a nerve with them because he was the person, he went to Fukushima 4 times. And after the 3rd or 4th time, it got put under national security. And his office can no longer discuss anything. And I tell him, because of I call it the Unpatriot Act. And I tell him, you know what? If you got 10 senators to break the Unpatriot Act, there is no way they would throw you in jail. This is what we need. We need an uprising of integrity that happens inside the people that have some power. They know, but part of it is, my own congressman said something about, they don't want to be Paul Wellstone. Paul Wellstone was literally killed, and this is the collusion. And it is catastrophic, but frankly, it's dying under its own weight. In my view, we just need to continue to do what we know is the right thing to do and refuse to back down and talk to people about loving themselves and help them find a way to get healthy and stand with integrity, because when you love your family, when you really love something, you can do anything that you want. And their paradigm of having us all enslaved and be their little minions is not my paradigm. I refuse to be like that. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I will not participate in that one.
Yeah. No, I love your passion. I've often said I don't
have to be violent,
No, I know.
but it does mean that we have to be willing to stand up and talk to each other as human beings and stop. I really am a big proponent of not calling each other names. I run my life with the Four Agreements. I don't know if you're familiar with the Four Agreements, but it's a great philosophy that was run by the Toltec people in Mexico before the Spaniards run them over. And it's really simple. It's number one is be impeccable with your word. And that means do what you say what you do, but also don't talk shit about other people and don't talk bad about yourself. This internal dialogue, stop that. And so the second one is don't make assumptions. Have the courage to ask questions. Say what you need. The third one is don't take it personally. People's worlds, they run around in their own little worlds. You're not in. If they hurt your feelings, it really has probably very little to do with you. And the fourth one is just do your best. So if you just can run on that and be unshakable on those things, I really believe that we will, the whole thing will just fall apart around us. And those of us that are living with integrity will be the ones to rebuild the structure, because it's not going to just boom, collapse overnight. It's going to decay and fall on its own. And in the meantime, we've got this catastrophic event that's poisoning every living being on the planet. So we have some big challenges in front of us, but I believe that intuitively, I believe that sound healing will be one of the answers for the radiation.
Well, let's just get back then to that hormesis thought, because a little bit of radiation being good for you sounds a lot like the vaccine industry's approach to vaccinating our children. And, as you know, Lonnie, they're trying to roll out, or have rolled out, SB 277 mandatory vaccinations law in California, and people are ticked because they do not want the magic needle from the magic government inside their kids' bodies, especially when you don't know.
It's not only that, Sean. I don't know. I had vaccines when I was a kid. They were not the vaccines they're giving our children today. These vaccines, they're giving children 14, 15 vaccinations. They're giving them a vaccine for, what is it, hepatitis C that you only get through sexual activity. Like, why does an infant need to have that?
Right.
This is an offense. It's really just using us as lab rats.
Yeah.
And profit. We are assets on a balance sheet.
Well, that's right. It's an offense to God. It's an affront to God's creation, and that really takes us full circle back to Fukushima. I mean, it's an affront to God's creation. What they've done, what they've allowed to happen, building these plants on fault lines, building these plants so close to the ocean and undefended against massive tsunamis. It's just an affront to creation. And I know I mentioned Satanism and how demonic the plan is earlier. I know that turns a lot of people off, but again, if you step back, if you take a look at the big picture and how overreaching, how far-reaching, and how interconnected all of these corporations are, and how evil the whole thing is, and how the Mockingbird mainstream media will not report on any of the stuff we've talked about on this call, it makes you realize that it really is a plan, certainly a collusion, if not a 100% conspiracy against humanity. And I just think that what's going on in Fukushima is really the ultimate deal breaker, because even if we wake up people to the fraud of the banks, the Federal Reserve, even if we could take our currency back from those that manipulate it, even if we could take back our sovereignty, I don't know how we're going to do anything about Fukushima. And from your view, Lonnie, is Fukushima now killing the Pacific? I know Kevin Blanch, another activist, a nuclear activist, has called it a Pacific genocide. Do you think he's right?
Yeah, it is a Pacific genocide. It is really catastrophic. I live on the coast, and there is very few birds. There's a man here who calls me. He's been going up and down the coast, and it's really outrageous that it is being ignored at this level, because once the ocean is dead. And I actually had a physician who told me, "Oh no, no, don't worry. The radiation is just it's the ocean is so big that what goes." And I said, you might have said that 3 years ago, but we're now 4 years into it, and it's worse. And what happens with the radiation? It's heavy, so it falls. And I believe that why we see these dead whales is it's killing the krill. It's affecting the microorganisms in there, and it's not just, I know a gentleman here on the West Coast also. There's a lot of activists taking action and doing things, trying to get the information that our government is not doing. He's doing a plot chart of all the sudden heart attacks of the college students up and down the West Coast. He's doing a plot chart from 13, 14, and 15, and he'll be finishing it up this year. And to show that there's an actual increase in heart attacks among the athletes who are outside. And he said it is really shocking. So it's not just the ocean that's being affected, it is all of us. And this is the biggest crime of the nuclear cartel. They are not spending money to try to figure it out. What they're trying to do is they're wasting their time moving dirt, trying to shuffle things around. And I really agree with you, Sean. I think it is sort of an evil little plot to eliminate the population on the planet. That's the only answer that there is, to be honest, is they look at it. I read a book by John Goffman on my YouTube channel called Population Control for Nuclear Pollution. It was written in 1972. And his conclusion was, unless we have advocates out there, this is what is going to happen, because they are on a mission. They summarily ignore all, and he calls them data diddlers. They mess with the data to convince people that it's just not that bad, when in fact it's beyond catastrophic. Yeah. It is beyond catastrophic.
Yeah, you mentioned the dead whales. This comes from ENE News. Giant whales found dead up and down Pacific Northwest coast. Scientists baffled over surge. 25 plus carcasses reported in just the past month. Government says troubling, definitely a pulse of deaths. Experts alarming spike, exceptionally rare to see a dead humpback whale. Concerns about unidentified pathogens. They will not mention Fukushima. They will not mention the radiation.
And they will not test for radiation. Actually, There was a group of 13 scientists that gave a press conference here. And one of the audience members said, "Well, are you testing for radiation from Fukushima?" They said, no, we're keeping the scope of the testing very narrow because we don't want it to become too broad.
Yeah, it's just like NIST refused to test for explosives on 9/11. So, right. Yeah, they're going to not look at the obvious areas in which to look, because they don't want to alarm the people, because they know that there's probably nothing that can be done about it, which gets us back to this idea of depopulation. You mentioned depopulation. I hate to say it, but the listeners know this to be true. That appears to be exactly what's going on. I mean, between the geoengineering, the vaccines, and Fukushima, and the list is far longer than that. Just those three things alone are a multi-vector attack against humanity.
Mm-hmm. It is really evil beyond, and really what it's about. And you talked about CERN earlier. It's really about their desire for total control. Yeah. That's the issue. Is they make Caligula look like an infant.
Yeah. Well, it's the new priesthood. You said it, and I think you're right.
They actually said. What was interesting about that article? It was considered classified until 2006. The guy gave the speech in 1972. And it was printed in the journal, and then it was classified after it came out in the Atomic Scientist Bulletin in 1972. The government classified it, and it disappeared.
And what was classified?
Released in 2006. This article by Arthur M. Weinberg.
What was the name of the article? Just remind the audience.
It's called "The Safety of Nuclear Power." It's kind of interesting. I can send you a copy of the PDF. You can read it. It's about an 18-page document. I read it on my YouTube channel. It is astounding. It was them proposing that nuclear isn't just that bad. He basically dismisses all of John Goffman's concerns about nuclear radiation and says, "Look, we're offering you free, unlimited energy, and you just have to trust us to keep the world safe." That's essentially what their attitude is.
Yeah, let me say one thing before we lose you. I know we're running out of time. Kevin Blanch has said that, the whole nuclear cartel and nuclear power is a complete and total fraud, and it's all about the Pentagon's need and desire for nuclear weapons. It's their stockpile of uranium and all the elements they need to make their nukes. That seemed like an overreach to me until Japan shut down all 48 of its nuclear reactors after the Fukushima event, and they've remained down to this day. And there have been no rolling blackouts or energy issues at all in Japan. And it really woke me up. And Kevin's the one who woke me up to that. I didn't realize that. How do you explain that?
Well, because they lie about what nuclear power really does. All of them, they're all like here in the Northwest, they say it provides 2 to 4% of the energy. That's a complete lie. They don't. In fact, your utility companies are required by law to use some nuclear energy, and you can petition your own local water board, electricity board to say we don't want to use any nuclear energy. They don't need it. They use a very small portion of it, and they don't need it. But I will correct you. They did restart a nuclear power plant in Japan in the last week, and it was 30 miles away from a volcano that actually started erupting 2 days after it reopened.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I was actually going to read that article. Japan restarts nuclear plant near active volcano. This comes from
Right.
Washington's blog.
Sakura has been very active for a long time. And, when you say that they're evil, I think that you're 100% right, because they knew that this volcano was about to erupt, yet what they're doing is, you are aware that there's secrecy laws in Japan now. They can't talk about radiation.
Yes, I am. Yes, they can't
And
even
so
report about Fukushima.
what they're trying to do is just normalize death. That's really what they're doing. They want people to just accept that they're going to die. They're going to be invalid. That's why they're going after all these electronic motorized things that help invalid people walk. They have all these new robots that will lift people and carry people, because nuclear pollution is a slow death. You don't die quickly. You get debilitated in most cases. If we would die quickly, it would be a lot easier on us. But what they do is, when I say we're assets on a balance sheet, they calculate how many people are going to die, how many people will be invalided, and how much money they can make off of all of this. It's a really, it is quite evil. It's a very, I'm the eternal optimist. I believe if our energy force is strong enough and we really believe in what we're going to do, they will come up with a solution. At this point, the only reason that they're in control is because most people refuse to have some courage and integrity and stand up to them. Most people are so petrified. It's like standing up to your abuser if you've been pummeled for the last 15 years by a spouse that everybody thinks is great, you're not going to go public and start telling everybody what he does. So we have to give people that little window of escape, and that's what I hope the Age of Fission does, is to give people a little bit of courage and a little bit of ideas on how they can start stepping out and exposing the lies of the batterers, because in my view, they are. And it's ironic that in our country we have a very serious problem with battery, because it's condoned in our country. They say it's illegal, but it's not. It's condoned, and it's a serious problem for humanity. That I think once we get past this, I really believe that humanity is on the precipice of truly developing into loving creatures.
Yeah, well, I think the potential's there. And Lonnie, I've said many times that this planet has the capability of being an Eden, of providing bounty for everyone and for being just a beautiful, peaceful place to live. But the banksters, all wars are banksters' wars. The people behind this maniacal plan, really in charge of destroying the planet at this point, don't want that. They just want to wreck life. They want to eat up the planet I think they want to own the planet for themselves.
Yes.
And that takes us back to the depopulation agenda. I mean, they don't want us around. So I guess our choice is, guys, either wake up and stand up and fight back, or become the minions, the little minions that Lonnie described, neo-serfdom, and embrace it. It's like it's like Huxley said, Lonnie, the people can be taught to love their servitude. And
Right.
and that's what's happened.
That's true.
The people love their servitude. So.
Well, one of the things that I'm really big on is education and reading. And, who would have thought that 1984 and Brave New World would be operating manuals for the people in charge? And they seem to have embraced fully how to destroy people's spirits by studying those books and implementing them. I mean, the conversation about, do you have a right to exist? The whole thing is very interesting. And even, we live on a planet where we have all these different cultures of clashing people, when really all we really need is people to just really be dedicated to humanity. And I think if we found scientists who would be willing to break ranks, because frankly, we need the nuclear scientists to be critical and start asking questions and really get an education. Part of what's happened is the education has been skewed. These young people coming out of, I know, Oregon State University, when you talk to them about nuclear radiation, they will tell you that there has been no studies done on hormesis, which is not true. I'm going to start reading a whole series of articles on my YouTube channel. I'm going to dig them up. These articles that John Goffman, Arthur Tamplin, and Linus Pauling did big studies in the 50s and the early 60s on the effects of hormesis because the government hired them. And what they proved unequivocally is there is no such thing as hormesis in terms of radiation. It's completely harmful to all life on the planet.
Yeah, it is. Well, I just love what you said about Brave New World in 1984 not being works of fiction so much as operating manuals for the elite. And you're so spot on. And, Aldous Huxley and the Huxley family lineage and the relationship to eugenics has been well documented. I think that's exactly what those are. They're operating manuals. They love to tell us what they're going to do, and then they do it. And if we don't fight back, that's on us. They feel as though this is a game of chess, and they're going to sort of preface their moves for the dumb people, for the sheeple, but the sheeple aren't going to pay attention anyway, so we'll never counter those moves, and it's just so damn distressing. Lonnie, I sure do appreciate your voice. It's just been a real pleasure to meet you. We're definitely kindred spirits, and I just hope that everybody will check out your great show. It really is a good show. You do a fantastic job with it.
On Fridays, I do call-in Fridays where I take phone calls. My show, this is kind of the format. On Mondays, I read the nuclear alerts and news about the nuclear and, frankly, about social engineering because I think nuclear and social engineering go hand in hand. And then on Wednesdays, I like to interview people. And on Friday, I take phone calls and allow people to discuss what's on their mind because I really believe that there are ideas out there. And we just need to give the voice to the people who are paying attention.
Yeah. Well, let's do that. Now, you say you take phone calls, and I've listened to interviews before. What happens to me is I often hear people's radio shows on YouTube much later, and then I want to call in. It's obviously too late.
Right.
So let's figure out how people can do that. Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 8 to 9 Pacific, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific. Do you want to give that phone number so that our dear listeners could jot that down? And I tell you, there are some really good people out there listening right now that know a lot about Fukushima and would probably love to have a conversation with you or ask you some questions. Can you give us that number?
Well, the number for Friday phone calls, and I really won't answer the phones on Monday and Wednesday, but the number is 718-717-8296. And before we go, I would like to put a caveat that to anybody listening, to pay attention to your own little nuclear power plant in your neck of the woods, wherever you're at, because they are all leaking. None of them they're all in a catastrophic state. They're very old. The NRC just keeps rubber stamping their licenses. For example, the Columbia Generating Station in Washington is 15 miles away from the Hanford site, sitting on top of an earthquake fault. And they have found last year that there's a crack in one of the pipes that is 1.5 inches, and they're like, well, it doesn't really need to be replacing. We're trying to get that closed down until they replace it, and they refuse to do it. Now, in Washington, Patty Murray loves nuclear. She's a very big nuclear proponent. She's the senator there. So we have big fights to come up, but I believe if we can get masses of people to make phone calls to demand these things all around, I don't know where you're at, but I can guarantee you there's a nuclear power plant leaking near you.
Well, absolutely. People need to get active. Otherwise, they're just going to play the role of victim. And I know most of our listeners don't want to play victim. They want to play activist. And you're just a terrific activist, Lonnie. And again, I want to remind people you can check out Lonnie's show. You can listen to the archives at ucy.tv radio. So look that up on the interwebs there. And you can listen live 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And please, guys, anybody who cares enough about this information, anybody that is an expert in this area, anybody that wants to contribute on air live to Lonnie's show, give her a call on Friday at 718-717-8296. And Lonnie would be more than happy to field your questions and have a little dialogue. Lonnie, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's been really terrific.
Yeah.
the interview.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And guys, thank you so much for listening. We really cherish the fact that you guys come back time and time again to listen to these important interviews. If you like this one, please give it a like. Send it around to your sphere of influence, and maybe we can wake up some of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues. God knows the hour is late. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great week.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.